Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph, who we will not be calling names
I was
today.
gonna say, you hesitated a while. I mean, hello, listener. It's so good to have you back. Dale, thank you for using my proper name this time. It is encouraging.
Yes, just so the audience knows, he was trying to mess with me, and he failed.
I want to count that as a partial success, but well, overall, yeah, okay. That'll just make me hungry to try harder next time. All right.
Mm-hmm. All right, so back to WW1. Are you ready to get underway and start with the
As a
conflict?
matter of fact, I am. The Great War, as they say.
Well, in terms of size, it was greatly huge.
Well, I think
In
the
I wouldn't
contemporary.
call it great,
Well,
though.
war is never great. Let's just get that
Yeah,
out there. However, they did contemporaries of that time period called it the Great War because it's like, whoa, they didn't anticipate a World War II. They just said, this is the biggest war that ever was. And it was crazy. We're going to call it the Great War.
it was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and guess what? It was not.
Yeah. They,
Anyway, spoilers.
oh, sorry. Yep. We'll see. We'll see who ends up winning. Listen to the end and find out.
All right. So, we're going to jump in with the Central Powers. The strategy of the Central Powers suffered from something we like to call miscommunication. Germany had promised to support Austria-Hungary's invasion of Serbia, but interpretations of what this means were different. Previously tested deployment plans had been replaced early in 1914, but these replacements were never tested in exercises. The Austro-Hungarian leaders believed Germany would cover its northern flanks against Russia. But Germany envisioned Austria-Hungary directing most of its troops against Russia, while Germany went and dealt with the French. This confusion forced the Austro-Hungarian army to divide its forces between the Russian and Serbia fronts. So, beginning on August 12th, the Austrian and Serbs clashed at the battles of the Sur and Kolubara for a couple of weeks. Austrian attacks were repulsed with heavy losses, which of course completely destroyed their hopes of a very quick victory. And this was actually the first major victories of the Allied forces of the war. So, as a result of all this, Austria had to keep sizable forces on the Serbian front, which of course weakened them against the Russian front. Serbia's defeat of the 1914 invasion had been called one of the most major upset victories of the 20th centuries.
Yeah. Everybody thought Austria-Hungary was this massive, dominant superpower, and for tiny old Serbia to defeat them was huge.
In the spring of 1915, the campaign saw the first use of anti-aircraft warfare when a Austrian plane was shot down with ground-to-air fire. It also saw the first medical evacuation by the Serbian army as well.
What does that mean? Medical evacuation? Just like they got people out of the front line to some
Yeah.
first aid? Okay.
Typically, before this, medical aid wasn't given until after the battle was over.
Oh, that is such a foreign concept. I guess nowadays it's like, why would you do that? Oh, well, I guess it's dangerous because there's fighting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people are shooting at each other.
Right.
but this is when this this conflict is when, battlefield triage was first really being introduced, and evacuations to medical tents and stuff like that.
That's wild. I had no idea.
Yeah. Oh, war's a great innovator.
Oh, for sure. That's I this war in particular, there's a lot of new technologies that really change the face of how things are done, and it's tragic actually.
When the war began, the German order of battle placed 80% of the army in the West, with the last 20% acting as a screening force in the East. The plan was to quickly, again, here we go, quickly knocking France out of the war, and then redeploying to the East to do the same to Russia. The German offensive in the West was officially titled Off March to West,
Hmm.
but is better known as the Schifflin Plan.
Yes. That's how I know it.
Yeah. Schifflin deliberately kept the German left weak to lure the French into attacking there, while the majority were allocated to the German right, so as to sweep through Belgium, encircle Paris, and trap the French armies against the Swiss border. This would actually this was actually helped by the French themselves, because their Plan XV11 or Plan 17, envisioned a major offensive into the lost provinces of Alsace-Lorraine. Now, the guy who replaced Schiffler, guy named Moltke, grew concerned that the French might push too hard on his left flank. So the German army increased in size in the years leading up to the war. He changed the allocation of forces between the German right and left wings from 85-15 to 70-30. So these changes meant insufficient forces to achieve the decisive successes, and it made the timing of goals unrealistic.
Yeah, I think their whole march through Belgium, although strategically seeming like a great idea, I think was a costly mistake. Yes, they were able to annihilate a lot of Belgian forts with new artillery, which, by the way, they used the heck out of artillery in this whole war. It's nuts.
Oh yeah,
And
there's a reason why they called PTSD then shell shock.
right, yeah. But I if they would not have gone through Belgium, I think the UK doesn't come in and doesn't help the French. So I don't know. I think
Well,
there were a lot of different decisions that were made by the Germans that I think they thought they had to follow this plan. But looking back, I think they were big mistakes.
oh, there was always big mistakes. There were huge mistakes right from the beginning. Remember when we talked about how the German leader Wilhelm was like, well, at the very beginning he was like, well, we've already lost.
Yeah, he was a unique figure, I think, just because from a diplomatic perspective, he was so engaged and capable. And so all these alliances that kind of dominoed into this huge war, he was able to kind of keep at bay. But then once he was booted, and then the new people didn't really understand the mechanics of the diplomacy, and they just pushed forward anyway. He's like, "Oh well, that you just blew everything up. We're doomed."
Yeah. Yep. So the initial German advance in the West was very, very successful. And by the end of August, the Allied left, which did include the British Expeditionary Force, was in full retreat. French casualties in the first month exceeded 260,000, which included 27,000 of them dead.
Those are astronomical numbers. Like those numbers
They are.
today are shocking, but back then were unheard of. That's like a war, like an entire war. You have those losses.
Yeah. Of that 27,000 were all killed in one day on August 22nd during the Battle of the Frontiers.
Yeah. Imagine you're on the home front and you hear, yeah, we lost 27,000 men in one day. What does that do? What does that do to your morale?
Oh, I'm sure that information did not go down to the boots on the ground. That would destroy morale.
Yeah.
No, that was not communicated to them. German planning provided broad strategic instructions, which allowed army commanders considerable freedom in carrying out their instructions at the front. And this worked well in 1866 and 1870. But in 1914, von Kluck used this freedom to disobey orders. This opened a gap between the German armies as they closed on Paris. The French and British jumped on this gap and used it to halt the German advance east of Paris at the First Battle of Marne, and then pushed the German forces back about 31 miles.
That was a good. I mean, yeah. I'm surprised they didn't go straight for Paris. That really would have. There's so many things again that you hear the strategy. You're like, why would they do that? And I'm sure they had some justification. Maybe they wanted to encircle the enemy, but yeah, that did not happen.
No. When you're talking about the massive scales of armies during this time, giving people the freedom to do whatever the hell they wanted, they don't have a complete picture of the battlefield.
Right.
So
Although
that can cause big problems.
Certainly, I think, and at this time they have at least telegraph, right? So it's not like they couldn't get news more quickly than somebody on horseback. And so
that also depends on if the telegraph lines have already been installed to the front line.
Well, 1914, they have radio also at this point too, because
usually wired radios. I don't think there's very much wireless yet.
Okay, I have to think about that because I know, like with observation balloons and biplanes, they had some method of communication, but I think you're right. It still was wired, and so it was limited.
It was still wired because we talked about the hot air balloon enterprise. Remember?
Right, yes,
and it was wired. All right. So in 1911, the Russians had agreed with the French to attack Germany within 15 days of mobilization. However, this was unrealistic. And the two armies that entered East Prussia on August 17th did so without many of their support elements, which means that the Russian Second Army was effectively destroyed at the Battle of Tannenberg.
Yeah,
but the Russian advance did cause the Germans to reroute their 8th Field Army from France to East Prussia, which was a factor in the Allied victory on the Marne.
Interesting. I just, every time I hear about Russia and the battles or any engagement in World War I feel so bad. Like, number one, at the beginning of the war, none of these armies had metal helmets, and everything was cloth. Everything was cloth hats. And they're like, oh, yeah, no big deal. This war will be over. Even when they said, hey, we need metal helmets because there are machine guns, and it will save the lives of soldiers, like, this war will be over in no time. There's no need. And then 2 years in, the Russians are still wearing cloth.
The Russians have never been very good at supplying their troops in the first place. They've always looked at their troops as just expendable.
I think, yeah, that's what, when I observe any battles involving Russia, that's what it seems like. And that's unfortunate. I guess from my American context, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you just throw a wall of meat? I guess that's all you've got. Maybe? I don't know.
You're seeing that even now. with their current conflict.
Yeah. I know, I think just prior to this, time period in 1914, the Tsar, I remember, was trying to have some kind of conference, if I'm not mistaken, with, the major players, the Germany, France, UK, and I think he wanted to put a halt to, weapons development. Like, in particular, ships, like, they could not keep up, and as soon as, like, something as big as a ship that took a long time to build was completed, new technology was already out there to surpass it, and Russia was just not keeping pace, and so they said, "Hey, let's have a treaty about we're gonna stop weapons development, right, guys?" And then people like France and Germany were like, "No, because 'cause we're way
Mm-mm.
ahead, and why would we do that to
Yeah,
ourselves?"
there's a reason why Russia only has one aircraft carrier. Doesn't work.
Ugh. Right. I mean, there's a lot of economic concerns, I'm sure. Russia's a huge it takes, like, 7 time zones. It's
Yeah,
enormous, and so maintaining that's gotta be an impossible task. But and to sustain a strong military, especially this time, that's I guess we'll see what the consequence of that is during the unfolding of this war.
absolutely. So by the end of 1914, German troops held strong defensive positions inside of France, controlling the bulk of France's domestic coal fields, and had inflicted more than 230,000 casualties than it had sustained itself. However, there were a lot of communication problems and a lot of questionable command decisions that cost Germany the chance of a decisive victory. It had failed to achieve the primary objective avoiding a long two-front war. This was apparent to a number of German leaders, and it amounted to a strategic defeat. Shortly after the Marne, like we said earlier, Crown Prince Wilhelm told a American reporter, quote, "We have lost the war. It will go on for a long time, but it's lost already."
Yeah, I guess they didn't succeed in their initial plan, and maybe improvisation wasn't something they ever considered?
Well, I mean, two front war is huge, especially again with you have the Russian army on one end. Just because they're under equipped does not mean that they are undermanned.
Right, oh, certainly. Well, I
Yeah,
know that, in this war in particular, that the advantage was to the defender, just because when as soon as machine guns appear on the battlefield, the attacker needs to advance to the position where the defender is, and they get mowed down, and they didn't really have tactics to accommodate for that, at least early on, and so
right. This is the first time these weapons are being used,
right.
and so this is the time when you have to make new plans and new strategies to defeat these type of weapons.
Exactly. And I think this
Which is
is
why we're seeing 27,000 killed in one day.
right. Yeah, the old tactics of gallantry, of standing up and charging and facing the enemy do not work when there are machine guns on the other side. And wearing colorful uniforms, like basically
Yeah.
painting huge targets on yourself, this is the last time you see that.
The days of formation battles are over.
Right.
All right, so we're going to move on to the Asian and Pacific theater. On August 30th of 1914, New Zealand occupied German Samoa. On September 11th, the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force landed on the island of New Britain, which at that time was part of the German New Guinea.
Oh, yeah.
And on October 28th, the German cruiser SMS Emden sank the Russian cruiser Zemchug in the Battle of Penang. Japan also declared war on Germany prior to seizing territories in the Pacific,
Oh yeah.
which later became the South Seas Mandate, as well as German treaty ports on the Chinese Shandong Peninsula at Saitao. Vienna refused to withdraw its cruiser, the SMS Karishin Elizabeth, from Shangzhou. And so Japan declared war on Austria-Hungary as well. And they sank that ship in November of 1914.
It's interesting that you see them and that you see Japan, the Empire of Japan, against the Central Powers in this war, but then joining
Hmm.
the Axis powers in World War II. And this is all opportunistic. Like it's, hey, Germany's way over
Oh yeah.
there. They're dealing with stuff and they can't defend these things that we want. And that's it.
Oh yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. So within a few months, Allied forces had seized all German territories in the Pacific, leaving only isolated commerce raiders and a few holdouts in New York. So let's jump over to the continent of Africa.
Oh,
So some of the first clashes of the war involving the British, French, and German colonial forces were in Africa.
oh yes.
On August 6th and 7th, the French and British troops invaded the German protectorate of Togoland and Cameroon. On August 10th, German forces in Southwest Africa attacked South Africa. Sporadic and fierce fighting continued for the rest of the war. The German colonial forces in German East Africa, led by a Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, fought a guerrilla warfare campaign during WW1
That's
and surrendered 2 weeks after the armistice took
wow.
effect
That
in
is
Europe.
some longevity. That is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very, very, very interesting.
Tough old coot is, I think, the proper term.
I'm
A
sorry?
tough old coot.
Yes. Yes, very, very tough old coot. Now let's jump over to India. So, Germany attempted to use Indian nationalism and pan-Islamism to its advantage, instigating uprisings in India and sending a mission that urged Afghanistan to join the war on the side of the Central Powers.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the British fears of a revolt in India were nullified when the outbreak of the war saw an unprecedented outpouring of loyalty and goodwill towards Britain.
Hmm.
Indian political leaders from the Indian National Congress and other groups were eager to support the British war effort, since they believed that showing the strong support for the war effort would further the cause of Indian home rule.
Yeah, I could see that.
They were like, we're gonna help you guys out, and then you can help us out by
Yeah.
getting away and never bothering us again.
Or you can still be in control, but we can govern ourselves, and we'll show you how capable we are by participating in the war.
Yeah. Still, get the heck out.
Yeah. I think that's the long game.
Yeah. So the Indian army actually outnumbered the British army at the beginning of the war.
Oh yeah.
There was about 1.3 million Indian soldiers and laborers serving in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East.
I think there was one of my favorite quotes, I think, was when there was a German official that was talking, I think it was to the military leader of Germany. Was it Falkenhayn? I don't remember. But he basically said, "Sir, what happens if the British army attacks?" And he says, "If they attack, I'll have them arrested." Meaning they're just so small, it's not even, I'm not
Mhm.
even going to consider them. Yeah, the British army is not big.
No, it's not big. They supplement their forces by the countries that they've taken over.
Australia, New Zealand, Canada.
Yeah. In all, 140,000 men served on the Western Front and nearly 700,000 in the Middle East.
Wow.
Casualties of Indian soldiers totaled 47,746 killed and 65,126 wounded during World War I.
So I know transit is everywhere now. You can go. I can get on a flight today to Vietnam and be there in a day, like no problem. But back then, uh, going outside of your country was pretty rare. I would say for most people in the world. I'm trying to imagine the mindset of a German soldier who's fighting against the Allies, and then they see people from India or from Africa and just people that they've never seen before fighting against them, and how that must affect, wow, oh, this is because they're an imperial power. They have colonies, and what do we have as Germany? And I don't think they had very much. And what they did have in the Pacific, you just mentioned, was taken away.
Hmm. They had nationalism. That's what they had.
And some pretty rockin' technology. I think they had an artillery piece that was so massive, it had to be delivered by rail, and when firing
Ah,
it,
yes.
they had to calculate. They had to take into consideration the rotation of the Earth. Like
Yes. That was World War II, though.
oh,
You're
no, no, no,
jumping
no! It was
conflicts.
World War One.
Was?
Oh yeah, artillery for sure. But they had massive artillery, and it was an advantage they had over almost every other military. I think rocketry, they were innovators in World War II, but
Yes. Yes,
yeah,
they were.
they were just demolishing. Like when they were going through Belgium, those forts that were supposed to withstand brutal attacks, they were just dropping like a house of cards.
All right. So let's get to the Western Front. Uh, Trench warfare.
Hooray!
Hey.
Uh,
Uh, so pre-war military tactics emphasized open warfare, and the individual rifleman proved obsolete when confronted with the conditions now prevailing. Technological advances allowed the creation of strong defensive systems largely impervious to massed infantry advances, e.g., barbed wire, machine guns,
mhm.
and artillery. Very, very powerful artillery, which is what was now dominating the battlefield
Oh yeah.
and made crossing open ground very difficult. So both strides struggled to develop tactics for breaching a entrenched position without suffering heavy casualties. Uh, in time, technology began to produce new offensive weapons such as the tank and gas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's bad
horrifying. Yep.
stuff.
But
Hmm.
I mean, I can see the mentality. It's we don't want to. I think the best, quote unquote, best gas weapons were those that maimed and injured but did not kill. Because if you're a dude in a trench and you've got three buddies that are incapacitated but not dead, the instinct is to help them, to try to move them out of the way or to try to do something. And so not only did they take them out of the fight, but now you're out of the fight. You know what I mean? And so,
Oh, I know what you mean.
but yeah, there was also
Still
mustard
not
gas
fun.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Lots of bad
lots of
stuff.
bad stuff.
So after the First Battle of the Marne in September of 1914, Allied and German forces unsuccessfully tried to outflank each other in a series of maneuvers later known as the Race to the Sea. By the end of 1914, the forces confronted each other along an uninterrupted line of entrenched positions from the Channel to the Swiss border.
Yeah, that is nuts. Like that is a lot of digging.
That is huge amount of digging.
But that was again a remnant of warfare that had existed for thousands of years. It's like, oh, if we just hit their flank, we win. and so we're gonna do that. And then they can't. They hit the sea, and they're like, well, now what?
The Germans were able to do trench warfare better than the Allied forces because the Germans were normally able to choose where to stand. So they generally chose the high ground.
Mhm.
Also, they built their trenches better because the Allied trenches were initially intended as temporary
Right.
because they thought they would only be needed until the breaking of German defenses.
Yeah, I think German trenches had like quarters for officers in them. Like they were pretty elaborate.
Both sides tried to break the stalemate using scientific and technological advances. On April 22nd, 1915, at the Second Battle of Ypres, the Germans used chlorine gas for the first time on the Western Front. Several types of gas soon became widely used by both sides. It was never proved as a decisive battle winning weapon. It had become one of the most feared and best remembered horrors of the war.
Oh yeah, because it's imagine seeing a cloud of something coming your way and not knowing what it's
Mhm.
going to do. And so it's like get especially early on when you don't have a gas mask. Like this wasn't a consideration. It's just like, oh, okay, it's coming.
What's that smoke? Why is there smoke?
Yeah, why is it hugging the ground and not rising into the air? Uh-oh.
Are they going to charge out of it? Get ready, guys.
Yeah.
And by the way, this was in total violation of the Hague Convention.
Well, was that even established at this point?
Oh, yes. It was established in 1899 and reestablished in 1907.
I see. So that's surprising to me. I didn't think gas or chemical weapons specifically were um, even discussed in that convention.
They most certainly were.
Well, yeah, I think gentlemanly rules for war oftentimes go out the window when the rubber hits the road. You know what I mean?
Or the bullets hit the dirt.
Oh yeah, when you're staring down the barrel. Oh, yeah, we got to do something. Nobody's moving. We're stuck in trenches, and imagine just gaining feet and then losing them again, and you're back to your old trenches again. That's
Yeah.
I'm not. Oh, let me be clear to the listener. I'm not justifying the use of chemical weapons. I'm just saying I understand the mindset of what drove those decisions.
Gotcha. All right. The XO approves of chlorine gas.
Whoa,
Gotcha.
whoa! Chlorine is for pools only, y'all. In the solid disc form. That's it.
All right. So neither side was able to deliver a decisive blow for the next 2 years.
Ugh.
Throughout 1915 to 17, the British Empire and France suffered more casualties than Germany. Again, because of the strategic and tactical stances chosen by either side.
Mhm.
The German or Central Powers as permanent trenches, and the Allied as this is just temporary until we get these guys out of here.
Right.
The Germans mounted only one major offensive, while the Allies made several attempts to break through the German lines. In February of 1916, the German attacked the French defensive positions at the Battle of Verdun.
Mm.
This lasted until December of 1916. 10 months.
That is a long time, and Verdun is not. That's probably, if you were to pick the worst battlefield to fight in, I think that would be in the top 3 for sure.
Yeah.
It's nasty. And this is before militaries knew to rotate troops. Like, these guys were on the line the whole time. They weren't
Oh,
they
yeah.
weren't rotated out, and so they're suffering the the shell shock for months.
Yeah. Yeah. Rotating troops out, I don't think was really thought about until closer to WW2.
Yeah. They may have figured it out a little bit at the end of this war, but imagine, I mean, like, it's horrible already, but then you have to think about this was totally unanticipated, and then they had to, oh, yeah, you know, it would be good if these guys suffering hell had a break and we had fresh guys.
Maybe we can, save them a little bit of mental anguish.
Yeah. Ugh.
So the Germans made initial gains before the French counterattacks returned them pretty much to their starting point.
Yeah.
Casualties were greater for the French, but the Germans received heavy casualties as well, with anywhere from 700,000 to 975,000 casualties suffered
Gosh.
between both the French and the Germans.
That's a major city, right? That's the population of a major city.
Oh, yeah. So because of all this, Verdun became a symbol of French determination and self-sacrifice.
Mhm.
The Battle of the Somme was a Anglo-French offensive of July to November in 1916.
That is a very long time.
Mm-hmm. The first day of the offensive was July 1st, and it was the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army, suffering 57,470 casualties. Of those, 19,240 were killed in action.
Wow.
This entire offensive cost the British Army around 420,000 casualties. The French suffered around 200,000, and the Germans about 500,000. Over 1 million casualties for this one battle.
It's when I try to ground that in reality with perspective. So if you go to the biggest football stadiums in America, for example, they can hold what, like 110,000? So multiply that by 9 or 10, and that's how many people got either killed or injured.
Yeah. Now, gunfire is not the only thing putting that casualty number into the millions. Remember, this is trench warfare.
Yep.
So just like back in the day with siege warfare, disease is a big factor in deaths and casualties on both sides. The living conditions made it so that countless diseases and infections occurred. There was trench foot, shell shock, blindness, burns from the mustard gas. There was lice. There was trench fever. There was body lice and the Spanish flu.
Golly. That's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was not a fun way to live.
Yeah, because you're in a trench, right? And just like, where do you go to the bathroom? In the trench.
In the trench.
Right. So it's just, you've got thousands of guys going to the bathroom in the freezing cold a lot of times. It's just, it's a disaster.
Not fun.
No.
All right, let's talk about some of the naval warfare.
Oh, ho, ho, ho. That's where we specialize in.
Yes. So at the start of the war, the German Empire had cruisers scattered across the entire world. Some of these were used to attack Allied merchant shipping. The British Royal Navy systematically hunted them down, though there was some embarrassment from its inability to protect Allied shipping. Before the beginning of the war, it is widely known that Britain held the position of the strongest, most influential navy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There was a book that was published by a guy written by a guy named Alfred Thayer Mahan, called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History in 1890. And he wrote this to encourage the United States to increase its naval power. Instead, it made Germany to want to overpower the British Royal Navy.
No, way to go, guy. I guess, well, yeah. You never know where ideas are going to go, right?
So, for example, the German detached light cruiser SMS Emden, which was part of the East Asian Squadron stationed at Qingdao, and they seized or destroyed 15 merchant,
Whoa.
as well as sinking a Russian cruiser and a French destroyer.
That's pretty effective.
Mm-hmm. Now, most of the German East Asian Squadron, which consisted of the armored cruisers SMS Scharnhorst and Gensu,
You should
the light cruisers.
say those
Huh?
again with your strongest German accent. Like really
Oh, there's more. Going to be a lot more German
do
names.
it.
The light cruisers Nuremberg
Oof, yeah.
and
There we
Listing,
go.
and 2 transport ships did not have orders to raid shipping and was instead underway to Germany when it met British warships.
Ah.
The German flotilla and Dresden sank 2 armored cruisers at the Battle of Cornell,
Wow.
and then was virtually destroyed at the Battle of the Falkland Islands, with only Dresden and a few auxiliaries escaping. And then after the Battle of Masse Terre, these had also been destroyed. So soon after the war began, Britain began a naval blockade of Germany, as they do. This proved effective because it cut off vital military and civilian supplies. Now, this blockade did violate international law, which was codified by several international agreements of the past 2 centuries, because Britain mined international waters to prevent any ships from entering entire sections of the ocean.
Why? That seems highly inappropriate.
Yeah, it causes a lot of danger to neutral ships as well.
Yeah. Imagine, okay, Dale, you're the captain of a new vessel. Congratulations. Hey, you're shipping important cargo over here. By the way, watch out for all these mines on your route. What the heck?
Yeah, not cool. Now, this caused the Germans to respond. And how do you think they responded?
Maybe by developing and perfecting underwater boat technology?
Yeah, unrestricted submarine warfare.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because when I read about that decision of the unrestricted submarine warfare, because one, they were against it. They're like, what are we going to do? We need something to kind of get us ahead. But right when this decision was made, if they would have waited like a month, there's a couple of game changers in the war that happened that really free them up, and they don't end up enticing America into the war.
Yeah. So that's going to bring us to the Battle of Jutland, which was in May to June of 1916. So that's going to bring us to the Battle of Jutland. So from May to June of 1916, this developed into the largest naval battle of the war. It was the only full-scale clash of battleships during the war,
Ooh.
and one of the largest in history. The German fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Reinhard Scheer.
Yeah, nice.
You like
I
that one?
did.
Fought the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet, led by Admiral Sir John Jellicoe.
Very elegant. Yes, I like that.
This engagement was a standoff, as the Germans were outmaneuvered by a larger British fleet. But they were able to escape and inflict more damage to the British fleet than they received. Strategically, though, the British asserted their control of the sea, and the bulk of the German surface fleet remained confined to port for the rest of the war. So the German U-boats now, they attempted to cut the supply lines between North America and Britain.
Mhm.
The nature of the submarine warfare meant that attacks often came without warning. Because once the unrestricted submarine warfare happened, they stopped giving warnings.
Right.
It used to be submarine would surface, say, evacuate, we're sinking your ship.
Right. And now it's just like,
Now it's just
boom.
pew, boom.
How terrifying that must have been for any transatlantic passenger.
So this means that the crews of the merchant ships now had little hope of survival. The U.S. launched a protest, and Germany changed its rules of engagement. After sinking the passenger ship HMS Lustonia
Ooh.
in 1915, Germany promised not to target passenger liners.
Too late.
Yeah, and this was happening while Britain armed its merchant ships, placing them beyond the protection of the cruiser rules, which demanded warning and movement of crews to a place of safety. Which, of course, was very hard because lifeboat standards did not meet the amount of people that were on these boats.
Right.
So in early 17, Germany then adopted the policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, realizing that, you know what, we're not keeping the Americans out of the war anyway. So, you know what, guys, go do this.
Go nuts. Right.
Yeah. Germany sought to strangle the Allied sea lanes before the U.S. could transport a large army overseas. But of course, as everybody knows, even after Germany's initial successes of the U-boat warfare, guess who showed up on European shores?
I want to say the good guys.
Well, I'm not going to go that far. Let's just say the U.S. military.
We're the U.S. Navy History Podcast. We gotta root for the home team.
Yeah, but we've not always been the good guys.
Well, there are specific circumstances where I can say that, yeah, maybe we were. And this, I think, hold on. Yeah, we'll just say the Americans.
So the U-boat threat lessened in 1917 when merchant ships began traveling in convoys escorted by destroyers. So because of the escorts, because of the convoys, it made it difficult for U-boats to find targets, which significantly lessened losses after the hydrophone and depth charges were invented.
Nice.
Accompanying destroyers could attack a submerged submarine with some hope of success now. Convoys did slow the flow of supplies because they had to wait as they were assembled.
Right.
So the solution to the delays was an extensive program of building new freighters.
There we go.
They did not worry about convoys for troop ships because they were way too fast for the submarines.
Oh, really?
And they did not travel in the North Atlantic convoys. At the end of the war, the U-boats had sunk more than 5,000 Allied ships at a cost of 199 submarines.
Wow, that is an enormous amount of ships.
Yeah. World War I also saw the first use of aircraft carriers in combat. The HMS Ferocious launching the Sopwith Camels.
That's the plane that Snoopy flies.
They used them in a successful raid against the Zeppelin hangars at Tondern in July of 1918. as well as against blimps for anti-submarine patrol. So we're going to actually go ahead and stop there for today. So what we're going to do is honor one of our fallen angels with the help of HeroCards.us. And today we're going to honor a man named Lieutenant Colonel David Dimon. His hometown was Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. Served with the Continental Army with the Salisbury District Brigade of Militia. His date of sacrifice was February 1st, 1781. Killed in action at the Battle of Cohen's Ford, North Carolina. He was 34 years old. Lieutenant Colonel David Dimon served under General George Washington in the Continental Army and fought in the bloody Battle of Brandywine near Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. According to the American Battlefield Trust, on September 11th, 1777, General George Washington was determined to prevent the British from capturing the American seat of Philadelphia. Opposing Washington was Sir William Howe, and an army of 15,500 British regulars and Haitian troops. Despite putting up a stiff resistance, the Continentals were eventually overrun by Howe's men. To prevent the defeat turning into disaster, Washington ordered Nathan Greene's division to act as a rear guard so that the Continental Army could escape to the northeast. Greene's brave men counterattacked, going toe-to-toe with British along the crest of German Hill. When night fell, the remaining Americans fell back in an orderly retreat, led in part by the Marquis de Lafayette. Although wounded, the characteristic young Frenchman remained on the field to ensure an organized withdrawal. Crushing defeat allowed the British to occupy Philadelphia, but the bulk of the Continental Army survived to fight another day. By many means, duration, geographic spread of the fighting, number of troops engaged, it was the biggest battle of the Revolution. The loss at Brandywine cost the fledgling nation its capital, but it earned new respect for troops determined to fight on to ultimate victory. Lieutenant Colonel David Dimon survived the Battle of Brandywine, but contracted a bilbus fever after a march in drenching rain. He died a few days after the battle on September 18, 1777. While Dimon did not live to see the final victory of the American Revolution, his death came little more than a year after the new nation declared its independence from Britain. He gave his life as a free man for the cause of American liberty. So, Lieutenant Colonel David Dimon, we thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Exo, take us out.
All right. So, listeners, thank you so much for joining us and learning more about the past and what happened and our commentary on it. If you would like to get a hold of us, maybe you want to correct something that was a glaring mistake, or you want to tell Dale, I love the German accent. Keep it up. There's a couple ways you can do that. One, you can email us, and I believe the email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can send a note there. Alternatively, you can get on X, formerly Twitter, X-Twitter. Our handle is at, I'll always forget this because I want to make sure I get it right, at USN, as in Navy, USN History Pod. Pretty sure that's right. Don't believe me? Check the show notes and find out for yourself. That information's there. Speaking of show notes, there's a Discord server link right there. You can click it, join up, and then talk about Navy stuff with us and others. It's great. Yeah, maybe you want to say why World War I was a huge tragedy. Yeah, I'm with you. Let's talk about it. Join the Discord, and we'll do that. Alternatively, or I guess in addition, you can rate and review us and help spread the word about our podcast. And more people will hear it, and you'll go, oh, did you hear Dale say this? It was great. Or did you hear Christoph say that? Not so great. or whatever. I'm not going to control what you tell other people, but tell other people. We would appreciate it. Thanks.
And with that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Bye.